Welcome back. All right, so based on the comments that I've seen on my eras without a cup, people want me to talk about the era that the Flyers went without a cup and the other era the Flyers went without a cup. So I opted for the 80s in the list that I did, and the Legion of Doom era people wanted to talk about and wanted me to talk about, so why not make it a video? So I'll start with the first era on the board, and this was the one where I was more surprised that Philadelphia didn't win a cup. Now, of course, St. Louis showed up on that board twice. In general, I tried to restrict it to one appearance per team on the board. And there's two reasons for that. One, I think it's important to talk about multiple teams. And two, it kind of feels like you're picking on a team and a fan base if you talk about multiple eras where they failed to win a Stanley Cup. I probably could have had Vancouver up there 3 times if I changed my parameters a little bit. And Philadelphia definitely gets on the board a minimum of twice. So 79-80, where I started with the era I talked about on the board earlier. They went 48, 12, and 20, 116 points. Pat Quinn is the head coach, and they went on a ridiculous long undefeated streak. And it was a league record undefeated streak. Pete Peters was on fire that year. So they lost in the Stanley Cup final in 6 against the New York Islanders. And of course, there's some debate about whether or not that Nystrom goal should have counted. I believe he was offside on the play. But at any rate, Reggie Leach had 50 goals that season. Pete Peters had a record of 29, 5, and 5 during the regular season. Absolutely fantastic. So 80-81, what do you do for an encore? Well, they went 41, 24, and 15, so 97 points, a drop of 19 points, and they lost in the quarterfinals against the Calgary Flames in 7. So Calgary went on a bit of a run that year at Philadelphia's expense, and so not quite the follow-up they had hoped for. In the 81-82, or Bill Barber at 85 points that year. Peters went 22, 12, and 5. All I have to do is follow the board. Do I? Half the time I don't. 81, it's not like I rated or anything. 81-82, 38, 31, and 11. So they dropped to 87 points, and they lost in the first round against the Rangers in 4 games. 3 games to 1 because it was a best 3 out of 5 at that point. Ken Linsman had 92 points, led the team. Pete Peters a record of 23, 18, and 3. So Peters still the goaltender, but that would change in the 82-83 season. Peters went on to Boston where he had a great year. But Pelle Lindbergh was ready, so he gets the net. 49, 23, and 8 would be the record for the Flyers, so they get back above 100 points with 106. Keeping in mind, it's very rare that teams reach 100 points during this era. They lost in the first round in 3 straight against the Rangers, so a great regular season goes to waste. Bobby Clark had 85 points, and Pelle Lindbergh goes 23, 13, and 3. 83-84, the team goes 44, 26, and 10, 98 points. They lost in the first round again, and it's 3 straight again, and it's against Washington. Tim Kerr, 54 goals. One of the best goal scorers that nobody talks about is Tim Kerr. One of the first career videos that I did, especially when I decided to come up with a THG Hall of Fame, had to be Tim Kerr. If not for injury, Tim Kerr is a Hall of Famer, first ballot. Bob Froese ends up being the starting goalie that year. Lindbergh's still there. Froese ends up 28, 13, and 7. 84-85, the Flyers end up 53, 20, and 7. 113 points. They go all the way to the Stanley Cup final, where they lost against the Edmonton Oilers in 5. Tim Kerr had 54 goals that year as well, and Lindbergh, great run for him, 40, 17, and 7. And this is where Mike Keenan takes over behind the Flyers bench. Quite different with Keenan behind the bench. 85-86, they go 53, 23, and 4, so 110 points. But they lost in the first round against the Rangers. That one went to the 5th game where the Rangers win it. Brian Propp had 97 points that year, and Froese ends up being the goalie, 31, 10, and 3, due to the passing of Pelle Lindbergh that year. 86-87, and this is where I consider this era to have ended. But what an ending for the Flyers. They go 46, 26, and 8. That's 3 straight 100-point seasons, 4 100-point seasons out of 5, and they had 98 points this season, which was the last before Keenan took over. So they were very strong throughout. They lost in the Stanley Cup final against Philadelphia, but it was against Edmonton. So much like Boston, Philadelphia runs into Edmonton twice. This time it took 7 games because Ron Hextall was the man, ends up winning the Conn Smythe that year. So Tim Kerr had 58 goals that year, and Hextall finished the season 37, 21, and 6. And then the Flyers would start to drop down the standings, starting with 87, 88. So the second era is the Lindros era. Now the Lindros era is interesting because it doesn't the Lindros era, the Legion of Doom era, was kind of a very up and down era for the Flyers. So 94-95, a lockout shortened season. They go 28-16-4 for 60 points. They lose in the conference final against the Devils in 6. Lindros that year had 70 points. Hextall went 17-9-4. So what's funny is Hextall is the goaltender in 87. He's also the goaltender in 95. But he was with the Nordiques and he was with the Islanders in between. So basically, if you're watching this video and you didn't know Hextall's career, you'd be like, he was in Philadelphia for a long time, uninterrupted. 95-96, they went 45-24-13, 103 points for them there. They lost in the second round against Florida, 4-2, because Florida's going all the way to the final and knocked off all the favorites to get there. Boston, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, as I remember it. Lindros, 115 points for him. I don't know that you can argue that that's his best season, because I don't know that you can argue any other year would have been his best season in the NHL. Hextall went 31-13-7, so it felt like a missed opportunity. So in 97, they go 45-24-13, 103 points. They go all the way to the Stanley Cup final where they get swept by Detroit. And Detroit kind of made it look easy in that final. Leclerc ends up with his 50-goal season that year. Hextall 31-16-5. And Hextall was pretty strong up until those playoffs. And goaltending was an up-and-down issue for the Philadelphia Flyers throughout that era. So 97-98, they finished 42-29-11 for 95 points. They lose in the first round against Buffalo, 4-1. So Buffalo ruins their chances at getting back to a Stanley Cup final. Leclerc had 51 goals. Hextall finishes the season 21-17-7. And that's the last time he shows up on this part of the board anyways. We'll talk about him again when we get here. 98-99, the Flyers finished 37-26-19. 93 points. Not as dominant a season, just the 37 wins, right? They lose in the first round against Toronto. That's in 6 games. Yeah, Toronto got out of the first round because we're pre-salary cap era. Lindros had 93 points that year, and Van Beesbroek became the goaltender. 27-18-15. Van Beesbroek gave them some very good seasons, but you could tell they had to, watch his starts and all that because, he played a ton of hockey by that point. 99-2000, they finished 45-22-12-3. 105 points for the Flyers that year. They lost in the conference final against New Jersey in 7 games. So conference finalists, finalists here, conference finalists here, just not quite able to get over the hump. So for them that year, Mark Recchi, 91 points. Van Beesbroek ended up with a record of 25-15-9. So 49 decisions there. 2000-2001, there's a change in net. They finished the season 45-25-11-3. This is where we start to see 4 columns. And eventually, someday, maybe we see 4 columns in the win-loss again. So it's 11 ties and 3 overtime losses. 100 points for them overall. They lost in the first round. And it's Buffalo again. This time, it's 4-2. So Primo ends up with 34 goals. So Keith Primo had a good run with Philly. And Cechmanek ends up 35-15-6. Cechmanek might be one of the greatest examples of a goaltender that was fantastic in the regular season and then had some mediocre results in the playoffs, although the numbers look pretty good. So it's an odd era. 2001-2002, 42-27-10-3 record, 97 points. They lose in the first round against Ottawa in 5. Simon Gagne, 33 goals, 33 assists for 66 points. I like the fact they all match there. Cechmanek ends up 24-13-6 that season. And this is where Lindros is gone. Lindros had left after the 99-2000 season. So again, the time where Lindros and the Flyers are great, it's not as long as one might remember. 2002-2003, 45-20-13-4 record, 107 points. They lost in the second round against Ottawa in 6. So second round losing there. Roenick led the team in points with 59. So this was a team that was relying on its defense and goaltending, and Cechmanek 33-15-10. So Cechmanek was holding up his end of the bargain, but he would be out. He'd be out in Philadelphia because the results in the playoffs just weren't what Philadelphia wanted. So 03-04, they go to 40-21-15-6 for 101 points. They lost in the conference final in 7 games against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And of course, 04-05, we don't have playoffs. 05-06, we have a salary cap, and everything changed. Mark Recchi had 75 points to lead the Flyers that year. And Robert Esche was the number 1 goaltender, ends up 21-11-7. So this is where Philadelphia enters into an era where goaltenders are overturning a lot, right? I've talked about goalie graveyards. We did a whole playlist of goaltending records and where the goalie graveyard was. And Philadelphia scored pretty high on the goalie graveyard list. So Lindros, as I said, left after the 99-2000 season. The team stayed very good. The Legion of Doom line was great. They had trouble at times with finding that secondary scoring. So if you shut down the Legion of Doom, you're probably shutting down the Flyers and putting them out of the playoffs. And at times the goaltending wasn't where you wanted it to be in a deciding game. So Hextall went 10-5 in the 95 playoffs, a .904 save percentage, so not awful. The good news with that was it was kind of a reprieval for Hextall after the previous season in 94 for the Islanders. Oh, that first round against the Rangers was terrible. So it was nice to see Hextall get some measure of, I'm not going to say retribution because it wasn't exactly, but at least he got his reputation back. He's 6-6 in the 96 playoffs with a .915 save percentage, so that's fine. 97, Snow and Hextall split the net. Snow ends up going 8-4 with an .892 save percentage. Hextall 4-3 with an .892 save percentage. But in that Stanley Cup final against Detroit, you really see the difference here. Vernon, .944 save percentage for Detroit. Hextall had an .862 and Garth Snow had an .857. After being embarrassed in 1995, the last time they've been to the Stanley Cup final, Detroit was not being denied in 97. 1998, it's Sean Burke who goes 1-4 in the first round, .860 save percentage. In 99, it's Van Beesbroek who goes 2-4 with a very respectable .938 save percentage. 2000 is Brian Boucher that takes them all the way to the conference final, 11-7 with a .917 save percentage. 2001, it's Cechmanek, who's the goalie of record, 2-4 with an .891 save percentage. 2002, Cechmanek goes 1-3 with a .936 save percentage. So overall good numbers, not getting the wins. Cechmanek in 2003, in what would be his final season as a goaltender for the Flyers, goes 6-7 with a .909 save percentage. Robert Esche, 11-7 the following season, .918 save percentage. And of course, in 2010, when the Flyers go all the way to the Stanley Cup final, they do it with 3 different goaltenders of record. And that was one of the most bonkers playoffs I can ever remember watching because the Flyers would just throw in another goalie and they'd start winning again. And then when things looked like they were turning against them, just switch goalies and it would work. So it is an interesting look at, these are the 2 eras again. For the video that I did talking about eras, I went with this one. I went with this one because I did feel like, having watched both of these eras, this one, it felt to me, was a little closer to actually winning a Stanley Cup than the Flyers Legion of Doom era. I don't remember ever picking the Flyers as the team I thought was going to win the Stanley Cup. And that's just me personally. I know there are others that did and others that found them as favorites. But I just looked at that team and thought, I don't know if this team can coalesce. I don't know that they've got enough from top to bottom in this roster to win a Stanley Cup. And of course, they get the 1 Stanley Cup final in 97, whereas this era here actually has 3 Stanley Cup finals. But again, I don't see there necessarily being a wrong answer here. And so for people who wanted me to talk about the Legion of Doom era, there you go. I did so. And so there you go. There's a video for you. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. And I'm going to apologize to Flyers fans because, I mean, there hasn't been a Stanley Cup since the mid-70s. And here I am, kind of being a jerk and here talking about 2 different eras where they get close a few times and don't win the Stanley Cup. So I apologize, but hey, let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.